Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet, coming to you from Jerusalem. You may be able to see that in the background. It's not the Kotel, it's a lobby that I'm in where I'm recording this
Some
with my good
misguided people think.
with my good friend Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island. And we are missing our colleague, our friend, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski this week, not able to be with us. He's attending to his father, family, and we are sending him our prayers and our thoughts with him as his family goes through uh, these days. We are remembering Ron Zvili also on day 824, the last hostage whose remains are still in Gaza. They are still looking for him, so they say, and they will bring him back hopefully soon. So it's just me and Barry here. We're talking about Parshat Shmot. We started a new book, which is amazing. It's an amazing Parsha. This Parsha uh, really has to go through quite a bit of territory, time, and space. To get us to the story. And Barry, I want you to, I'm going to ask you to reflect on some of the opening parts of this before we get into, I guess, the great moment of the burning bush. So you have the Israelites in Egypt. One thing we could make reference to is that there is a Pharaoh that does not know Joseph. And I wonder if you could describe or explain or talk about that and the decisions that he
So
makes.
it's a fascinating opening, and it makes one wonder if Sefer Shemot was ever meant to stand alone.
Hmm.
Because we have in the first few verses a very quick summary of the end of Sefer Breshit, where the Jacob and his sons come to Egypt, and in 7 verses, this family becomes a nation. And I
Yeah.
think the word Am is used for the first time somewhere around verse 7.
Verse 8,
And
verse 9, I'm sorry. Hine am b'nei Israel.
right. So Bnei Yisrael at the beginning is the children of Israel or Jacob. And several verses later, Bnei Yisrael is the Israelite nation.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we were talking about before is there's a lot of great Rashi in this Parsha. And one of my favorites comes on verse 4, is it? Yeah, but yeah, verse 5. He called Nefesh Yosef Yerach Yaakov Shivim Nafesh, Yosef Hayavim Mitzrayim. That the descendants of Jacob were 70, and Joseph was in Egypt. And Rashi, following the Midrash, asks a question: "V'halohu v'anav ayub klau shivim." Weren't he and his sons already in the count of 70? Uma balalam deidu. What does it come to teach us? That this comes to teach us the righteousness of Joseph, that the way we're supposed to read it is that it was Joseph who was in Egypt, not the second in command to Pharaoh, but the shepherd son of Jacob from the land of Canaan. That even though Joseph had a remarkable transformation from a slave to the pinnacle of Egyptian society, he was at heart the same person, and he's one of the few people that the rabbis identify as a tzaddik, as a righteous person. And as I had cause to mention earlier in the week in giving a Debar Torah, Joseph is one of the most complicated people in Sefer Breshit. And I don't know that many of us would think without prompting that he was a tzaddik. He did some great things and even some righteous things, I would add, but I don't know that that's what we come away from. But this idea that Joseph remained central, his core identity remained the same throughout all, I think is instructive. I've been teaching high school for a long time, and I like to use this comment when I address the seniors in Minyan, because what we want, I think, of our children who go off to college is, the expression is that they should find themselves. We don't want them to become someone new. We want them to become who they are.
Yeah.
And this idea that we have a core identity, the rabbis, find with Yosef, and then later on, I can't remember where, a similar comment is going to be made about Moshe. That Moshe also started out as a shepherd, and he became the greatest figure in Jewish history, but he was the same humble Moses all the way through.
You
And
know,
it gives us something to think about.
so it's interesting, as you mentioned that, what I'm thinking about is, we got so involved in the life of Joseph at the end of Breshit, the last four parshiot of Breshit, and take us through, and I think you mentioned it, that it's a very complicated figure, a very complicated character, and yet, by the time we get to the beginning of Shmot, we are removed from that story. I already feel, that the stories of Breshit are so far behind us, and so now what Yosef Hayab Mitzrayim is doing is shifting the perspective. It's almost saying we now have a different historical perspective on this unique character. In the same way that complicated characters, um, you know, over time, it's not that they lose their complexity. It's that we tend to, will focus on their heroic parts or the things that will make them, extraordinary. I mean, we can think of contemporary examples, maybe. I don't know. We all love Abraham Lincoln as a character, and of course, of late, it's become very popular to focus on all of his. He had melancholy, maybe he was a depression, maybe he was, maybe he had Marfan's disease. There are lots of things and maybe and in his lifetime, and you would speak to this better than me. In his lifetime, there were people who reviled him, despised him, and of course, he was assassinated and became a mythic figure. The same thing I think happened with John F. Kennedy and others. They become extraordinary figures in hindsight or with the passage of time. So what the opening of Shmot does, it tells us time has passed. We're now situated really generations after Joseph. And we're looking back to Joseph, and my first reaction is, well, Joseph's the one that's responsible for bringing them there in the first place, and maybe we still have some scores to settle with him, but let's set that aside now. That's what I'm reading here.
Well, I think you make an important point because Joseph is the the transition figure. He leaves Canaan, the promised land, at a low moment. Not only the lowness of the pit, but is sold as a slave into Egypt, and he does rise as a complete reversal of fortune in Egypt.
Yeah,
And that's the new scene. But I think part of the emphasis on Yosef here is that our connection to the land is rooted in the family drama, not just the national drama.
uh-huh.
And it's the family's connection to the land that I think is critical. The Torah could have begun, as Rashi suggests in his opening comment on Bereshit, with the first commandment in Parshat Bo. This will be the first month for you. Or it could have begun with Sefer Shmot, because that's when we have the people.
People have
But
people.
our story is a family drama. And, what I sometimes think about is when we survey Western civilization, it's sometimes hard to know where to put Arab/Muslim civilization because they're not quite West, they're not quite East. And, part of the problem, from my point of view, is that a number of the Arab countries are tribal countries, even today. Saudi Arabia is ruled basically by a tribe. And, they haven't had their renaissance and their intellectual revolution in the modern period. They had it in the Middle Ages. And, that's a problem. But part of our rootedness in the Middle East is that our family drama is also a tribal drama. And that's what this passage reminds me of.
Well, being situated in the Middle East right now, I feel that. You know,
Oh, you could speak to them.
I can speak to that. I think part of the experience of being in Israel is, that we're part of something larger that is not only peoplehood, but it's people that really relates to each other as extended family. I used to have the experience while being here, maybe not as much now because it's so much, been coming to Israel for years now. Um, but I used to feel walking down the street that I was, maybe I know people in common with people. And of course, the game that we play when we're here is, who do we recognize? Who do we bump into? And today I actually was in the library, the National Library, and I thought I recognized someone who had been my counselor on Ramah's seminar about
Oh,
50 years ago. And I I nearly went up to him and said, "Are you so and so?" And like, but I didn't do that, and whatever. I regret it. But the point is that we have kinship. We share that, and there's the transition that is being spoken about here is a movement from one state of kinship to a larger state of kinship, and
yes,
and
that's an
we're
excellent
all in
point.
that. Yeah. So I want to turn to the where everything changes, and of course, since we're talking about Joseph, everything does hinge on Joseph, and this verse Vayakom Melech Hadash al Mitzrayim Asher Lo Yadat Yosef. There arises a new king who doesn't know Joseph, and of course, we have the various interpretations of that. That the king doesn't know Joseph; it's a much later king, or the king, changes policies. But he
Right, and
says
this is great. Oh, go on.
I was going to just lead into the next couple of verses. He says, "Hinam b'nei Yisrael ravatzum mimenu," gives the statement. Here's the people. First time that phrase is used. The people of the children of Israel. There are many, and they're greater than us. Hava nitchakmalo. Let's wisen up to them. And so here, this often referred to as a proto-anti-Semitic statement. The idea that the the Jew, or let's just say the Israelite, which becomes, of course, co-equal to the idea of the Jew, becomes a symbolic figure in the imagination of the Egyptian, and takes on such an outsized presence in Pharaoh's mind. They're a small people, and he's afraid that they're going to become larger. That's an extraordinary statement, and that you hear echoes of that down to this day. Yeah,
Well, so a couple of things. First of all, I don't want to gloss over the important midrash that Rashi quotes on the Melech Hadash Lo Yada et Yosef. So he quotes the the Talmud, I guess it is. Ravu Shmuel Chadamar Chadash Mamash, but Chadamar Shednit Chadshu Gezerotah. That we have this formula in the Talmud many times, where we have two opinions, we have two rabbis mentioned, and it doesn't tell us which opinion goes with which rabbi, which is, and you can make a case for either one,
yeah,
and it's part of the wisdom, but also the fun of the Talmud, is that you have these open-ended things, and you can't always tie the threads together neatly. But the explanation that's given here is that one of the rabbis think that this new Pharaoh is someone who's really new. That,
uh,
in other words, he's the Pharaoh of Joseph has been succeeded by someone else, and now the new Pharaoh takes a look around his land, realizes that there's a foreign presence that bothers him, and is going to take steps to offset their power. And the second explanation is that it wasn't a new king, it's just a king who made new decrees. And it's hard to imagine which one is worse, whether it's the new king who's really new and that's just, times changed and we're stuck with what we have, or that it's the king that went bad, that
yeah,
started out benevolent and now suddenly is not. But one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking is that from the Egyptian point of view, one can understand how Israel could be a threat because the fear is that your land will be overrun by foreigners and you will no longer be in control of your own land.
Hmm.
And that's a terrible thing because where do you have to go? The foreigner can always go back home, so to speak, but the native has no place to go.
Right. Well, look,
And
this is playing itself out on in so many
in a
ways
lot of countries
in a
today,
lot of countries,
yes.
and rightly, wrongly. I mean, it's not that there's a sense that they're being overrun, but there is a sense of a critical mass being a critical number being reached, which will affect the politics of democracies. And this, in particular is a reference to radical Islam and the Islamic populations that have as a program to reach certain kinds of critical population numbers so that they can begin to exercise political power in democracies and take advantage of it. It's a serious conversation, you know, and of course, even to raise it is to be to expose yourself to claims of xenophobia and racism and Islamophobia, etc. But as we're projecting that back into the biblical story here. It's hard to imagine how, the Pharaoh, who is the greatest power on earth, political power, would be threatened by this. I mean, I recently, as a few months ago, visited the Metropolitan Museum and saw the Egyptian wing. I mean, if you want to just experience the sense of grandeur and the sense of how small we are, you know, then go take a walk there. I mean, we had no monumental buildings like that in ancient Israel. We were shepherds, and so we threatened that. That doesn't make any sense to me, you know.
So, right, it doesn't make sense because I don't think it's necessarily rational. It's psychology and maybe a psychopathology. And I think ultimately what's at its root is a disconnect between how a person sees himself and how a person wants to be.
Yeah,
And, the issue for Pharaoh is that he senses it as a threat. But one of the things I wanted to add is that one of the values of projecting this back into the world of the Torah is that we can talk about the world of the Torah in a non-confrontational way because these people are long gone.
yeah,
It's a lot harder to talk about the issues today directly
much so.
because people of all stripes, meaning those that we agree with and those that we disagree with, have their antenna up, and one of the first things that breaks down is communication because we don't listen as well as we might. And so, part of the usefulness of the Torah is that it gives us a vocabulary to talk about serious issues without, damaging relationships.
Interesting. Let's take a step forward and go to what is probably the most pivotal moment in this parsha, and that's Moses in the burning bush. Uh, we move through some stunning stories of the birth of Moses, the adoption of Moses by Pharaoh's daughter, and Moses' banishment and exile to the Midian, and his meeting of Zipporah, the daughter of Yitro, and he is a shepherd, and it's not an accident that he's a shepherd, and he is out one day grazing the flock beyond the grazing field, Achar Hamidbar. Now, we got to translate Hamidbar not as the wasteland, but the grazing area. He's in at the boundary zone near the mountain, and the boundary zone near the mountain is not a grazable place, and it's there that he sees this bush, and the text is rather enigmatic here, but it's worth quoting. It's chapter 3, verse 2. It says, Vayera malach Adonai elav, an angel appeared to him, bilabat esh, in the flame, mitoch hasneh, in the midst of the bush, Vayar, he sees it. Vihine, behold, Hasne boer ba'esh. The bush is burning, Vasne nenu ukal, and the bush was not consumed. And there's so much in that scene. First of all, it's v'hasne, it's the bush. It's not just an ordinary bush. So Barry, I'm going to propose a story here, which is that this is not the first time that Moses was out in this area. There's a mountain there, and
Well, not just a mountain. It's the
it's
mountain
the
of
mountain of
God,
God.
right?
Now,
It's
does
the
he
mountain of God. It's
does he
Har
know
HaElohim.
this? Does he know that this is the mountain of God? Maybe, maybe not. But let's just say stop with a mountain. A mountain is a commanding place altogether, right? And it will command your attention. But he's been there before because this is the bush. I want to mention this only because you know I'm smiling only because around where I grew up in Ottawa, I used to go on lots of walks and hikes and uh, near my high school, it was a beautiful little creek, and there was this one gorgeous, gorgeous tree there, big, big oak tree. I love to go to see that tree. I felt like, years later, I read Shel Silverstein's story, the Giving Tree, and this was a beautiful, beautiful tree. And Shel Silverstein's tree is a place that's very personal. And I would go there and I'd see that, and it would be like arriving at a destination. And throughout the years, I would see this, so it wasn't my first experience with this tree, and of course, there are famous trees in America. You had the Mercer tree in Princeton. You had the Salem oak. I did a little research on this. There are lots and lots of important trees, and maybe there is a mountain and there is a tree or a bush or something that commands most of the attention. And on this particular occasion, when he goes there to have this experience, he sees it's on fire, and that
So, what do
alarms
you
him.
make of this, though? So, I mean, the language is so telling that he sees this bush, this sneh, and it's burning but not being consumed. So, the only thing I can think of is that there's no smoke. That's why he has the sense that it's not being consumed. In other words, when you look at a fire, generally in the smoke, you see the destruction. And here he's just seeing a fire, a,
Yeah.
I guess, kind of attached or centered in this bush. And he knows that this is not normal, that this means something.
I think that that's what it is. I mean, this is a theme now in the Torah because we have a God that is a consuming God, that is the all-powerful God, that if you get too close to, God will burn you up. And religion has to be a way of containing that nuclear power in a way that will translate into something legible in life.
So, one of the things